Okay, Ryan, thank you. Well, let's go to Canberra now. Joining us live is the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Treasurer, good morning to you. Have you lost control of the economy?
Well, the economy continues to go from strength to strength, and you can see that in the headline numbers, Pete. The unemployment rate today is at 4%, the equal lowest in 48 years. And yesterday, the Reserve Bank of Australia confirmed the resilience and the strength of the economy and is forecasting now an unemployment rate at 3.5%. But what the Reserve Bank Governor pointed out yesterday in his public comments and statement is that it's appropriate now for monetary policy to normalise as the main impacts of COVID start to subside, and just as a fiscal policy has started to normalise. And that's why you saw yesterday's movement by the Reserve Bank. But the overall health and strength of the economy is there for everyone to see.
Did loose fiscal policy, though, such as cash handouts and cutting the fuel excise even, contribute to the inflationary pressures?
Well, actually, the halving of the fuel excise will see inflation fall by a 1/4 percentage point, according to Treasury. And Treasury were asked at budget estimates very recently, did they think that the announcements that we put in there around the cost of living relief would materially impact on inflation? And they said no. What yesterday's Reserve Bank statement makes very clear, and these are their words, by the way, that the main drivers of the higher inflation are global developments. And that is both the war in Ukraine and the COVID pandemic, which has disrupted supply chains. And it's affecting the whole world, not just Australia. And as a result, central banks globally have moved, not just in Australia. Indeed, the Federal Reserve in the United States has lifted the cash rate by 25 basis points. In the United Kingdom, the Bank of England has lifted the cash rate by 65 basis points. In Canada, by 75 basis points. In our neighbour, New Zealand, by 125 basis points. So we're very conscious of the cost of living pressures that Australians are under. That's why we've made the announcements in the budget, not just around the fuel excise, but also around the low and middle income tax offset, topping that up by $420, the $250 payments to millions of pensioners, carers, veterans and others on income support, as well as making medicines more affordable. This is what our government is doing for families to help them through this challenging period. But it's also a time, Pete, that Australians are reminded why you need a steady hand at the helm. The Labor Party criticised us when interest rates went down. Now they're criticising us when interest rates went up. They cannot have it both ways. In fact, Wayne Swan was very clear when he was the Treasurer that emergency level interest rates cannot stay there indefinitely, and that is very true about yesterday's decision as well.
Just a couple of points there. You pointed to international factors affecting our economy, which is true, and that was pointed out by the RBA yesterday. But the RBA also said that domestic capacity constraints also played a role in the current economic conditions.
Well, we all know that the biggest issue for employers these days is workforce shortages. That's an obvious fact, and that's why I announced in the budget more than $3.5 billion to create 800,000 new training places. That's why in the budget we announced a number of new measures to help small business skill up their staff. That's why in the budget we're investing in a $120 billion 10-year infrastructure pipeline to boost the capacity of the economy, to drive productivity, to help create 1.3 million new jobs over the next 5 years. You see, the Labor Party, they want to have it both ways. They want to make politics of a situation which really reflects global developments and the normalisation of monetary policy after being at emergency levels. And then they want to hide their plans for higher taxes and higher spending to after the election. They can't have it both ways. And we're going to call them out, and the Australian people should call them out too.
We've got the biggest debt now in Australia's history, inflation to peak at 6% this year. That's above your own budget forecasts. Rates heading to 2.5% eventually. Are you really the better economic manager?
Absolutely. And when you look at what Australia has gone through over the last few years, it really has been the most significant economic shock since the Great Depression. It was 30 times the size of the global impact of the GFC. 1.4 million Australians either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero. And Treasury came to me at the height of the pandemic, Pete, and said the unemployment rate could reach as high as 15%. Today it's 4% and heading even lower. And we know that our recovery has been stronger and faster than the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy and Japan. And just the other week, the International Monetary Fund downgraded their global growth forecasts, but upgraded Australia's growth forecasts. So we know that wages are starting to pick up. That's what the Reserve Bank said yesterday. We know that the unemployment rate continues to come down, and we know that the growth prospects for Australia are higher than the rest of the world. So it is a very positive story to tell. That being said, there are challenges out there, and that's why in the budget we got ahead of this interest rate announcement. We're getting ahead of the higher inflation numbers, and we announced that significant cost of living package.
Treasurer, 6 months ago, Governor Lowe assured borrowers that rates would stay low until 2024. Many people picked up mortgages on that pledge and now have to suffer the consequences as a result, may even default. How is that not a failure on his part?
Well, the Governor of the Reserve Bank and the Board of the Reserve Bank are independent of government, and that's why I wasn't critical in any way of their decision yesterday.
You're the Treasurer, though. That's surely a bad call. He's made a number of bad calls, surely.
Well, again, they are in control of monetary policy. We as the government are in control of fiscal policy. I'm not going to criticise the Governor of the Reserve Bank. It's for him to explain, as he did yesterday, what is driving his decisions and the bank's decisions. With respect to us, we have brought emergency economic support to an end. We ended the JobKeeper program. And do you remember what Anthony Albanese said at the time? He said that the economic roof would come crashing down. Yet within the next 3 months, 120,000 more jobs were being created. Remember what Jim Chalmers said early on in the pandemic. The single biggest test of the government's management of the pandemic would be what happens to unemployment and jobs. Today, unemployment is 4%. Under Labor, it was 5.7%. Underemployment, youth unemployment, female unemployment are all lower today under the coalition than they were under the Labor Party. Of course, there's a higher debt burden, but that's because of the size of the economic shock. And we haven't baked in to the budget, as Labor did, unrealistic commodity price assumptions. Today, iron ore is trading at $130 a tonne. I've got it in the budget at $55 a tonne. Yet we still saw just a few weeks ago, a $100 billion improvement in our budget bottom line, the single biggest improvement in some 70 years. And the reason, Pete, was because more people are in work and fewer people are on welfare. So we're very happy to debate the economy every single day of the week. But the Labor Party simply cannot be believed. When they were last in government, they put in place higher taxes like the carbon tax and the mining tax. We know that they will always spend more, which will put up more upward pressure on interest rates. And we know that they have a Labor leader who can't even tell you the cash rate, let alone manage the consequences of it.
OK, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, know you've got a busy morning. Thanks for your time, though. We'll talk to you again soon. Well, coming up,